Hi and welcome to today's video on Python basics. On today's session, we'll actually be covering Python functions, global variables, and capturing input. So let me open my code editor. So we'll start by covering the Python functions, and functions are basically a block of code that only gets executed when it's called. So I will actually first create one, then get into details. How do we create a function? In order to create a function, you need the keyword def. Then you give your function any name. Let's say print name. So you can use any word. Now you've already created a function, but now a function cannot exist on its own without some block of code. So I'll come below here and maybe print something. Print hello world. So we've already created our function. It's by using the keyword def, writing any name, and the name should be somehow related to the function it's doing. Let me change this. So after writing the name, you need the double brackets, then a colon, then you need to indent right below your function and write the code you want to be run whenever you'll be calling your function. So we've already created this. So in case I run this, you'll actually see that it doesn't output anything. Why is this? This is because once you create a function, for it to run, you need to call it. So how do we call a function? Just below your function, don't indent, write the name of your function. So this part here is the name of your function, and it can be any name, but make it something relevant to what your function is doing. Follow the double brackets and a colon. So to call my function, I'll just write the name of my function, which is print hello, and I also need to have the double brackets. So if I run this time, you can actually see actually brings hello world. So you can write as many lines of code inside your function, but remember, the lines of code, for the block of code to be run, you need to call your function. So functions take arguments. What are arguments? Arguments are basically values needed in a function that maybe dictate the outcome. Let me explain this. Let's say you're creating a calculator and you have a function add. So in our function add, we want to add two numbers, but how do you get the numbers? This is where the arguments come in. Inside the double brackets, you can specify any amount of variables. In my case, I'll only be using 2. And so what do I want to do with this? I want to I'll create another variable sum and do x plus 1. So in our case, our function takes 2 arguments, and the arguments are obviously variables, which is x and y. And since our function is given the name add, which is what is relevant to what it will be doing, I'll first of all get the sum, which I've done, then I'll print the results. So what's the advantage of using arguments? Makes your code reusable, where in case you have multiple data, you don't have to write a completely custom function handle the specific data. So in my case, let me first print this. In my case, I'll come I will show you where the difference comes in. So we already created a function, we still need to call it. But remember, our function had requires 2 arguments. So to avoid any errors, you need to give the 2 arguments. Otherwise, it will bring up an error. So let's say I want to add 5 to 6. And the same way you separated your arguments with the comma, the same way you separate it when you're calling it. So in case I run this, you can see it brings out 11. I explained that it enables you to use a code where you can add, where you can use different types of data. So let's say I have another number 4 and 10. Actually notice that I don't have to write 2 custom functions for each value. I can just write one which will handle all values in that area. That's why you need the arguments. So let's say you have multiple functions. Let's say you're creating a school administration system. So you have the name, the name. So I'll add a parameter. So go ahead and create a variable full name. And so once you create a variable, you can actually assign it to your parameter, our arguments name. So name is what we've gotten when you are calling a function, and the full name is a variable that we've created. Let's say you also have another one for getting the registration number. Remember, the names don't have to be the same as mine. So I'll also create another variable. I'll call it registration number. Then assign it to our argument number. What else can we just maybe course? Which requires the name. Then I'll create another variable course. So one thing you actually notice that you can have a variable and a function of the same, which have the same names. But the fact that one is a function and one is a variable is what differentiates it from each other. So in our case, these two can't conflict. The program can't bring up an error because one is a function. As you can see, when I hover it, it tells us here that it's a function. While this other one, it's a variable. Variable you can see. So we've already created 3 functions which get the student details, but in our last function, we want to print the details. So one thing you note, we have 3 variables that we need to print, which are full name, the registration number, and the course. But they are in different functions. Actually note, if I write one of them, you can note that I cannot access. So let's say I write print full name. As you can see, it already brings up an error. Why is this? This is because the variable has been created in a different function and cannot be accessed outside that function. So this is where global variables come in. So you can tell from the word global, this means that the variable can be accessed outside the function it was created in. What do I mean by this? After writing the print details, I've written print full name, but conceptually it brings up an error, and the error says that full name is not defined. This is because it doesn't recognize our variable since it's in a different function. So how do we make our variable recognizable outside its original function? We add a global. So global is a keyword. Then you write global, then write your variable. And you have to note that you do this before creating your variable. We've written the global full name, then our variable full name. And you can see the error actually disappears. So you'll have to do the same for the rest. So I'll go ahead and write global registration number, then global cross. So in our last, we want to print everything. So I'll go ahead and write print so we'll print the variables together with some string, some descriptive string. Something you need to notice, I've started by writing an F, then some quotation marks. So what does this do? This actually allows you to use you use strings together with a variable without using the addition sign. So in other cases, maybe you'll be told to maybe, let's say I want to get two details. Let's say name, I'll come and write name. I want to give a detailed output of maybe the name of gotten. So in other cases, you maybe need to use this. Use name plus maybe the variable name. But now instead of using the add sign, you can actually use the F, which allows you to add the variables inside. I'll actually explain. So you don't have to understand the first one. I'll actually emphasize on this. So maybe for the first row, I want to enter the user's name. So I'll go ahead and write name. So one thing you note, there are no additional sign. Instead, we use curly braces. And so inside the curly braces, we need to include our variable. In our case, it will be full name. Full name, which we created in our first function. So next, I'll do the same print. Remember the F, then the quotation marks. You can actually note the F has a different color. Then the color braces, then your variable registration number. And finally, the course. Okay, so there's actually an issue here. Once we made our variable course global, it actually ended up interfering, conflicting. So I'll have to change the variable name. So unless you're using it as a normal variable, not a global one, using two names is actually okay. But once you start using the global variable, using the same name will actually cause some conflict. So I'll go ahead and change this to maybe degree course. Just a change here. Just a change here. So you can see there are no errors, so I'll go ahead. So we've created our functions. Remember, after creating them, we need to call them. So actually remember how we call them. Just need to write the name of your function, name. Then if it has, if you declare some parameters, you need to include them. So you see, whenever you hover, it actually tells us it takes one value, which is name. So I'll go ahead and give it name, maybe Ben. Then next we have the registration number. It also takes a parameter. I'll give it maybe 54687. Then next course, software engineering. And finally, to display our details, we'll go ahead and type the print detail. You can see if I run this, our function print details is able to access variables that are outside this function. And these variables include the full name, the registration number, and the degree course, which are outside the function. So that's all about the global variable. So finally, we'll go ahead and deal with the input. So let's say you're creating a program and actually you need the user to insert the data. So how will you go about this? We'll go ahead and try it. In my case, I won't be changing a lot. So you'll create a variable. I won't create any new, I'll use the existing ones. Create a variable, then assign it to input. So input is a custom function, not a predefined function that allows the user to type any data which is later captured by your program. So input is a function. You write input, then you need to write some string which prompts the user to maybe do something. In our case, it's inside the name function. I'll go ahead and enter your name. So this is the text that will be displayed when the user runs this. So I'll do the same for the rest, only changing the names. I'm only spacing this for uniformity, it's nothing big. So in our second case, it will be enter your registration number. And finally, enter your course. So before we run this, let me clarify something. So basically what this does, the input, it prints the word enter your name, asking the user to give it some data. Then the data is assigned to your variable, the variable created. Okay, so before I run the program, I'll remove this. And also inside here. Then I'll run this. Let me run this. So it starts by asking us for our name, Ben. So whenever we write Ben and click on enter, it takes our input, which is Ben, and assigns it to our variable full name. In our second case, it is enter registration number. So I'll write 34568 and click on enter. Takes that data, the number we've given it, and assigns it to the corresponding variable, which in this case is registration number. And finally, the course. I'll write software engineering. And you can see. So after we've given it our input, the input is actually assigned to the corresponding variable. For the name, it's the full name, the registration number, the degree course. Then inside our print details, it captures the data in those variables and prints them. So we've actually come to the end, but let me verify. Let me do an overview. So in this program, we managed to create a function. Remember the def keyword, the name you give it the double brackets and a colon, followed by calling a function. Remember a function, the block of code inside a function cannot run unless you call it. And we've also been able to access variable outside the original function, which is through the global keyword. Making our variable global makes it possible to access the variable outside its original function. And finally, we've been able to capture input from the user, which is through the function input, which takes a value string, the string that will be displayed to the user to prompt him or her to enter the required data. And that's all for today. Let's meet in the next video. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. Let's meet in the next video.